So good evening and welcome. I'm Helene Marsh. I'm the Vice President of Environmental Forum of Marin and co-chair of our community education events. So the last few weeks have really been extremely challenging for Californians. More than 80 people have died in the camp and Woolsey fires. More than 1,200 are still missing. Tens of thousands of people have lost their homes. And impacts also include terrible air quality for millions in the state, environmental contamination, wildlife deaths and displacement, and vast amounts of CO2 emissions. So climate change impacts in California include higher temperatures, less precipitation, and more powerful winds, resulting in a longer fire season and record-breaking fires. 65 fires are burning in California right now, and the San Francisco Chronicle now has a full-time fire reporter. So, does this look familiar to you? How many people have experienced some form of impact, adverse impact from these fires recently? So I think that's really almost the whole room. And we absolutely have to all work together across the country and across the world to implement large-scale climate solutions that are going to save us and the planet. As we know within our own country, there are deep divisions in our political system, vastly different perspectives on environmental issues, and disagreements among those who want change as to what that change should look like. So our goal for this evening is to understand what it might take to cross these divides for effective problem solving. We're extremely fortunate to have guest speakers this evening with deep understanding of these issues, and I'd like to thank them for their time, passion, and expertise. Environmental Forum of Marin has been working for 46 years, training advocates for the environment and delivering community education events such as this one. We hope you enjoy tonight's program and leave inspired to do something yourselves to bridge the divide and work together. So I'm now honored to introduce our Congressman Jared Huffman, U.S. Representative for California's 2nd District. Where are you?
Good-looking crowd there.
So Congressman Huffman has represented California's 2nd District, which spans coastal counties from the Golden Gate Bridge up to the Oregon border since January of 2013. He's a member of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the Committee on Natural Resources. Beginning in the new congressional term, Huffman will chair the Natural Resources Subcommittee on Water, Power, and Oceans. So congratulations. So both in the State Assembly and Congress, Jared Huffman has worked across the aisle to forge bipartisan consensus. 2 years ago, Huffman launched a podcast called Off the Cuff with Jared Huffman to share his work with constituents. Off the Cuff is a place for productive discussions and open dialogue about how we can make our community and our nation a better place to call home. It's through discussion, fair debate, and exploration of common interest that we can find common ground and bridge the divide. Please welcome Congressman Jared Huffman.
Well, thank you, Helene. And what a great turnout. I am so thrilled to be with all of you. And let me just take a moment to say what a huge fan of the Environmental Forum of Marin I have always been. It really is one of the great environmental organizations in this community, and it wouldn't exist if it weren't for some real environmental legends who I've looked up to for many, many years. A bunch of them are in this room, and too many to call out, but there's one that I just have to call out because he's been one of my heroes for a couple decades now, from the very first time I even thought about running for office for the Marin Water Board back in 1994. Dr. Marty Griffin was my mentor. Marin and Sonoma would be very different places if it were not for the environmental leadership of Marty Griffin and many others in this room. So thanks for what you do, and thanks for the way that Environmental Forum has continued to make better environmentalists in our community and make better citizens. It's just been wonderful to sort of check in every few years. I get to participate on, in one way or another as a speaker, as part of the program. And I just see generation after generation of Marin County resident coming through this program and going on to be great environmentalists and great citizens. So that's wonderful stuff. Tonight we're talking about bridging the divide, the political divide, for a healthy environment. And you have some wonderful speakers that are going to follow me, including Professor Arlie Hochschild, who you're going to sell a few books tonight, I hope. I just had my podcast promoted, so I hope your book does as well as my podcast. And she'll talk about the sociology of that great divide. I'm going to speak from the political perspective. And let me just say it's almost impossible not to be a little partisan, unfortunately, when we talk about the environment right now. And that's a fairly recent phenomenon, because if you go back to the early days of the Environmental Forum, there were Republicans that helped to create and lead the Environmental Forum not too long ago. And of course, Peter Baer and many others, there were Republican environmental leaders here in Marin and in many other places around the country. That has really changed in recent years. The whole issue of protecting our environment has become radicalized along party lines. And we do need to improve that partisan divide over this issue, because that situation is just not durable. It's not sustainable if we want to make progress and get things done. But I will say this about this conversation, how to bridge the divide. I would much rather have this conversation with Republicans being in the majority than from the perspective of the minority. And in that regard, I guess I start off with a little bit of good news, because the election that we had a couple weeks ago not only was a blue wave that is still cresting, actually. Some new numbers just came in, and it looks like, in addition to all the seats that we've flipped in California, we may yet flip another in the Central Valley. TJ Cox is less than 1,000 votes behind David Valadao right now. And Nate Silver, of all people, is projecting that Cox could pull it out. So that's exciting. But this wave, this blue wave, is not only a big blue wave, it's a green wave. All over the country, we have had amazing candidates step forward, many of them with backgrounds in clean energy. These are folks who not only had the right position on climate change and environmental protection, including a guy in Charleston, South Carolina, who won an incredible upset victory on the issue of offshore drilling, opposing offshore drilling in a deep Republican district. So we not only had them taking the right positions, but in many cases, these candidates were leading with these issues, talking about the urgency of transitioning to a clean energy economy. So the next Congress is going to be a heck of a lot greener and not just bluer, and that's kind of exciting for me, and I think it bodes very well. So I think this conversation, from my perspective, breaks down into two parts. One is sort of what it's been like the past 6 years as your representative in Congress. I have tried to bridge the divide wherever I can. I can talk a little bit about what I was able to do and some of the frustrations that I had. And then there's the part about where do we go from here with this new political landscape, new and much improved from my perspective. So, looking back at the last 6 years, the first thing you need to know is that in every committee, at every level of the Republican Congress, and pretty much in every level of at least the Trump administration, that's just been the last 2 years, the agenda has been driven by the fossil fuel and mining industry all the way. At every turn, they have pushed forward a race to extraction, a race to profit at the expense of environmental laws for the benefit of industry. There's also the climate denial problem. Now, you've heard the good news from all of the polling. You know, Americans, like people around the rest of the world, are sort of figuring out that climate change is real. The percentage of people who are actual climate deniers keeps going down. It's a very, very small percentage now. The problem is they're all serving in the United States Congress, right? So that's a problem. My only option in that climate was to try to build some relationships of trust and confidence. I have a lot of friends in the Republican caucus. We differ politically, but I bring my Republican guests onto my podcast, as Helene knows. I try to find issues that we can work together on. Environmental ones are tough, but Mark Sanford in South Carolina is a good example, one of the most conservative members of Congress, but he actually accepts human-caused climate change. He lives in a coastal district that's terribly impacted by it. So we were never able to figure out anything to do together on climate change, but at least I could bring him on my podcast and we could have a conversation where I got a very conservative Republican to acknowledge the problem. That, I guess, was helpful. He got voted out of office by his Republican constituents because he criticized Donald Trump. So, he has paid a political price on his side of that. Another colleague, Carlos Curbelo in Florida, accepted human-caused climate change, actually was willing to do a few things, unlike most of his Republican colleagues. And very recently, just a couple months ago, he joined me on a letter to the EPA, taking a very strong stand against this attempt by the Trump administration to withdraw California's waiver under the Clean Air Act that lets us pursue our own clean car standards, us and I believe 13 other clean car states. So Carlos Curbelo went on record with me pushing back in favor of clean cars and higher emission standards. He got voted out a couple Tuesdays ago, unfortunately. Well, I don't know. He'll be replaced by a great environmentalist, a Democrat, but that's sort of part of the political challenge of bridging the divide, having these conversations. The ones that are the most reachable are the Carlos Curbelos, who is moderate in a very close swing district. Those are also the low-hanging fruit for us as Democrats to take out. And Carlos Curbelo is out of a job. So I was able to partner with another Republican from the Philadelphia area, Brian Fitzpatrick. He joined me on a bill to try to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. I was pleased that he and I think a half dozen other Republicans were still willing to stand up for wilderness. Unfortunately, their Republican colleagues slipped a little provision into the Republican tax bill a year and a half ago, and in a tax cut bill, they actually opened up the Arctic Refuge to drilling, and so they set us back in that regard. We're going to challenge that in court, and hopefully we're a long way from actual leases going out in the Arctic Refuge, and it'll give us enough time to get a new administration in place and a new Congress that will undo that. But right now, after all these years, going all the way back to the 80s, where the Arctic Refuge has been protected, we are playing defense on trying to protect one of the most unique and special places in the world. Nevertheless, there was at least a Republican cohort with Mr. Fitzpatrick that was willing to work with me on that. And then the most unlikely collaboration, of course, is a recent one involving a very targeted attempt to try to help maintain sustainable multi-generational ranching in the Point Reyes National Seashore. I teamed up with very conservative, arch-conservative, you might say, Republican Rob Bishop of Utah, who I spend most of my time fighting with. And yet we were able to come to an agreement on a bill that came out of the House with strong bipartisan support, is pending in the Senate. It may pass in the weeks ahead in the lame duck session. We'll see where that goes. But that's about it. That's about the extent of what I was able to accomplish across the aisle in the previous 6 years. Now, going forward, I see a really different set of possibilities. And I want you to know the change that you're going to see with a Democratic House will start with something that's been totally missing the last couple of years, which is oversight. There has been no legislative oversight of the executive branch at all, and that's a critical function, to have a government that actually works, to have checks and balances. So we're going to get back in the oversight game, and that could create a little tension, perhaps, because some of my Republican colleagues are going to want to rally to the defense of the Trump administration. You know, that it's just sort of this. They just sort of see everything in partisan terms. So that's going to be a challenge. But if that doesn't just poison everything between Democrats and Republicans in the next Congress, I hope it won't. There's some chances to work together on legislation, and I think the most exciting possibilities include fisheries. Anyone care about fisheries management? Yeah, so I was the lead Democrat trying to work out a bipartisan Magnuson-Stevens reauthorization this last Congress. I was working with Don Young of Alaska, who is an incredible character. I get along with him really well, even though his politics are just kind of scary, really. And we were this close to a bipartisan reauthorization of the Magnuson Act, which had been made really tough by his Republican committee staff because they took this historically bipartisan fisheries bill and loaded it up with all this anti-environment stuff, you know, little waivers of the Endangered Species Act and attacks on the Antiquities Act and runs at national marine sanctuaries and all kinds of things that did not belong in this bill. And then they took the pillars of what has made our American fisheries the most sustainable in the world, the envy of the rest of the world. These are provisions in the Magnuson Act that require enforceable rebuilding timeframes when a fishery is actually overfished, and really science-based catch limits. This is kind of the discipline of the Magnuson Act, and they created broad exceptions to that for their favorite industries. So that made it tough. At the end, I couldn't get there. They passed a partisan bill that we had to all oppose, but Don Young and I are going to get a bipartisan Magnuson Act in the next Congress, and it's going to be a good one that I think all of you will be proud of. The issue of healthy soils and soil carbon sequestration is one that has attracted some interest across the aisle, because I've got a lot of Republican colleagues who represent rangelands and grazing interests and others, and they see some possibilities to maybe not fight about environmental values, but work together and put their grazing activities to work, building healthy soils and doing good things, even as they continue to deny climate change a little bit. So we'll talk more about healthy soils than carbon sequestration, but I think there's the possibility to team up with someone like Rob Bishop and other Republicans in the West and do a big bill that'll help pull some carbon out of the atmosphere, build healthy soils, and also support sustainable grazing. Water is an issue that has become really radicalized, and we spent the last 6 years fighting with Republicans because they thought the solution to Western water shortages was to pit fish versus farmers and try to gut the Endangered Species Act. And we're going to have a very different conversation with the gavel in my hand on the Water Subcommittee. We're going to talk about real solutions. One of the most obvious involves Corps of Engineers reservoirs. I'm just going to try not to wonk out. I only have like 2 minutes left, I'm being told, so I'll talk fast. The Army Corps of Engineers operates its reservoirs using these old 3-ring binders from the 1950s. And they look at backward hydrology, they run the numbers, and they determine what are the probabilities of flooding tomorrow. And we have these great new things called satellites. And they can actually tell you the probabilities of a major weather system coming in, and we can actually use science instead of backward hydrology and extrapolating in a really primitive way. So I've been pushing this thing called forecast-informed reservoir operations. I was this close to getting an extremely conservative Republican from Arizona to co-sponsor this bill with me until a staffer convinced him that it was like some stealth climate change thing, even though he couldn't really figure it out, but there was something climatey about it, and so they spooked him on the bill, and we couldn't get there. But in the next Congress, we're going to be able, I think, to do forecast-informed reservoir operations and a bunch of other just common sense, low-hanging fruit water solutions. I will mention just one more. It has to do with fire, right? We're all breathing this terrible air. There's an incredible, I think, desire that cuts way across party lines to do everything that we can, especially here in the West, to make our communities more resilient, more fire ready. And how we manage our forests is part of that. And we're not going to solve it by raking the forests, okay? So please disabuse yourself of that. There's no Finland model that is going to save us with rakes. But there is a lot of work that we can do in our forests that will make them healthier, that will make them more resilient, that will create some economic activity in rural forested areas like many of the ones I represent on the north coast of California. And I'm confident that we're going to be able to find some ways to work across party lines to get that done without gutting any environmental laws or taking any environmental shortcuts. So those are the few of the things that I'm actually excited about that I think will make for a better conversation across this partisan divide. It's just a great conversation to have, though, when you're in the majority. So let it begin. Thanks, folks. Thanks, Aaron. Absolutely.
Thank you, Congressman Huffman. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening, Professor Arlie Hochschild. She's Professor Emerita of Sociology at the University of California, Berkeley, and author of the New York Times bestseller, Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right. In this book, Hochschild seeks to understand why people in the Deep South who are greatly impacted by environmental degradation and pollution support the system and people causing their demise. This is a complex topic, but Hochschild does a masterful job in helping the reader develop the empathy and understanding required for problem solving. Hochschild is the author of 9 books and has long focused on the human emotions that underlie moral beliefs, practices, and society. We are very honored and appreciative to have her here this evening. Please welcome Professor Arlie Hochschild.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Boy, it is a tremendous honor to be here and really at ground zero of the environmental movement in the United States. Really. Am I right that this is the only county in the entire country that is 100% reliant for its electricity on renewables? No, I'm wrong? Almost? Working on it. All right. Okay. Well, I am an optimist, and you'll see. But truly, I'm thrilled to be here. The whole history that Marty Griffin has, the whole forum here, the whole purpose of this, and now with the congressman that's carrying the torch to Washington. So I thought I would do 2 things today. One is share with you a strange journey that I've made over the last few years from a blue enclave in the sociology department at the University of California, Berkeley, in Berkeley, California, and California, blue, to an equal and opposite enclave. I've gone from one world in a way to another. And what led me to want to do this was my realization that, in fact, we were so divided. This began in 2011. But already there, I could see Congress was blocked. They wouldn't let Obama really accomplish his agenda, and feelings were hardening. So I thought, if we're not going to accomplish any of our goals, and the other side, the right, is growing faster and stronger, do I know anybody from the right? I thought, my neighbors, my friends, my family, really good friends to whom this right agenda made sense. I had to say I didn't. And been to many countries and studied many things, but that was still a foreign country to me. So I thought, why don't I get out of my bubble? My electronic bubble, that is, I look at my computer and it gives me myself back again. My media bubble, I read the New York Times, the Washington Post, Mother Jones, The Nation, and my geographic bubble. And it's interesting that while each left and right are isolated, actually there are some studies that show that it's the left that's more isolated, that's less likely to know people different from themselves than the right. So I thought, okay, let me get out of my bubble, and where would that be? Well, the Tea Party, 2011, was rising, and fastest and strongest in the South. So I wanted to go to the South. But where in the South? Well, how about the Super South? And I looked at the proportion of whites who voted for Barack Obama. And the whole region of the South, it was 30%. But in Louisiana, it was 14% of whites in 2012 voted for Obama. So I thought, perfect. Okay, and within Louisiana, I had one advantage. I had a graduate student of mine in environmental sociology, had a mother-in-law who lived in Lake Charles, Louisiana. I'd never been to this state before. And she said, well, look, why don't you come and visit me? Because she was an artist and a progressive, but her best friend over 3 generations, and they had keys to each other's houses, her best friend was an ardent member of the Tea Party. Both of them were very politically engaged people and completely opposite politically. So I thought, how fascinating. Maybe they have some secret we don't know about. And let me just go and give it a try. And I wanted to go at it with a certain method. And the method was to take my alarm system off and to permit myself a great deal of interest and curiosity about the lives and the beliefs of people with whom I knew I would differ. To cross, as I came to call it, an empathy wall and climb into the shoes of people I didn't know. I took with me, though, a kind of a red state paradox that was puzzling me. How could it be that across the whole nation, it is the poorest states, the states with the worst reading and math scores, the worst health care, the most road accidents, the most gun accidents, the worst environment, and the lowest life expectancy are also those states who take more money from the federal government in aid than they give to it in tax dollars and revile the federal government. That is the red state paradox, and I didn't get it. If you have some problems, wouldn't you like some help, and wouldn't you appreciate that help and affirm that kind of help? I discovered that Louisiana was an exaggerated version of the red state paradox. Second poorest state in the nation. It has all those troubling rates and a life expectancy 5 years shorter than in Connecticut. It's about on the par with Nicaragua. And 44% of the state budget came from the federal government, and it was overwhelmingly Tea Party. So I thought, perfect, okay. And I thought, within Louisiana, how about the Southwest, which they proudly call the Buckland America's Energy Belt? There are 147 major oil companies and petrochemical companies that have established themselves along the whole southern border of the boot of Louisiana, or in a receding boot that's turned into a sandal, actually, because of rising levels of water. So on my first foray out there, I established myself at a little Rose's bed and breakfast, and I had my rental car, and I went over the I-10 bridge to Westlake, which is a very big industrial town. And I realized that my eyes were beginning to sting. And I realized I couldn't see clouds in the sky. I couldn't see the sky. Everything was overcast. I thought, wait a minute, maybe there's a center to this Louisiana exaggeration of the red state paradox. Maybe the keyhole issue here is the environment, because I was meeting some very good people. As the congressman said, you can meet some really fine people who share a different truth. But they were living with a very high level of pollution, but didn't believe in regulating polluters. So that became the keyhole issue for me. And what I did was go to meetings of Republican women of Southwest Louisiana, and there would be the flag salute and the prayer, and then there was a raffle for a rifle. I knew I wasn't in Berkeley. And then I would make dates to interview people at those luncheons, and I met, for example, a wonderful gospel singer in a Pentecostal megachurch, it turned out, and she said, "Oh, I love Rush Limbaugh." So I had my little empathy wall moment. Oh my God. And, "Oh, I'd like to talk to you about that. Could we meet for sweet teas tomorrow?" "Yeah, sure." So, and I presented myself as, "Hi, I am Arlie Hochschild, writing a book about you, and yeah, I come from the other side, but I'm interested in the divide." And that was the first spark you got in their eyes. They'd say, "We're worried about the divide too. But that's because your people look down on my people. You think we're backward and ill-educated, and we're the flyover state. You think that we're racist and sexist and homophobic, and you Bible thumping, and you denigrate us. You don't know. If you want to write a book about who we really are, yes, be happy to talk to you." And I said, that's exactly what I would like to do. We're not going to agree, but I do want to represent you as you feel you really are. And so that they could hear that. They want and would try and help me. But this woman who loved Rush Limbaugh began, I asked her, "What do you really like about him?" "Oh, he's my Braveheart, and he hates feminazis." So I thought, God, I hope she hasn't Googled me. I'd ask, "Well, what is a feminazi?" "Well, it's a mean, tough woman." Oh, wait a minute, who are we talking about? Okay, so, and then on to environmental wackos. "Oh, I hate environmental wackos." "Well, what is an environmental?" "Well, it's someone who worships animals, like an animist, right? That puts animals ahead of people." Okay, and then she said something interesting. She said, "I know you don't agree with what I'm saying to you. Is it hard for you to listen to me?" And I told her, "Actually, not at all. I have my alarm system off. I'm not here to convince you, and you are doing me an enormous favor, for which I'm extremely grateful, in sharing your way of seeing things." And so she said, "Oh, I know what you're doing. I do that too. I do that with my kids. I do that with my co-congregants." And we had that in common then. Nothing else but that. And it began with that. "Oh, would you like to go to the over 60s gumbo cook-off tonight?" Yeah. Do a little bingo. So that was kind of how I did this. And in the end, I tried to select certain people that I went a stage further. I met a man who, who ardent Tea Party person. And I'm going to tell you about him. He said, I said, "Could I see where you were born?" He said, "Well, I was born on a sugar plantation." And the book begins with, he was showing me in his red truck, just 6-foot-high sugar cane. It's still a sugar field. But where he was brought up as the son of a plumber, one of the third of 5, no longer was there. It was a renovated slave quarters, actually. His father had been a plumber on that. He then grew up, that was his childhood, kind of the Old South. His adulthood was working for oil. He was a measurement guy. And measured the lengths and weights of materials that are used to build the oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. So I asked him where he went to school. Could we visit the school? What row did you sit in? Where did you go to church? Where are your kin buried? And in the course of all this, and especially fishing, and he knew the face of every fish. I mean, they were like portraiture. You could tell you what they looked like. I mean, he knew nature. He loved nature. He loved nature. He knew a lot more about nature than I, who advocate nature, did. But something happened to him that's very telling. When I first talked to him and asked him why he was a member of the Tea Party, he said, "Oh," and later, everybody I talked to, everybody in that book, as an ardent Trump supporter. They are his base. So at the beginning, he said, "Well, you know, I don't like the big government because it takes community away from people. It does for people what neighbors and friends should do for each other. And that's my chief objection." But what was to happen to him is he had a very modest home on a bayou in a place called Bayou Corn. Is that raisinese? Bayou Corn? No. Okay. It's about 40 miles from what's now called Cancer Alley, between Baton Rouge and New Orleans in this highly polluted state. So he said, well, yes, big bad government takes community away. But he was to lose his community, not because of big bad the presence of big bad government, but because of the absence of it. Here's what happened. One day he began to feel there were like earthquakes in this area, which is in southeast corner of Louisiana. There had never been earthquakes around these bayous before. He thought he was having a heart attack and stumbling around. And then people began noticing bubbling up, and it was raining, and it looked like it was Alka-Seltzer tablets, a little bubbling methane gas coming up. And then his yard began to tilt. And in fact, the main road out of Bayou Corn, which everything was the crab cake road and you know, a Crayfish Road and Jambalaya Lane, and all of them began to kind of look wavy, the road between the homes and their jobs. So people were terrified. What had happened was in the bayou, there was a drilling company, Texas Brine, that was drilling through the bottom of the bayou into an underlying salt dome formation. And it had disregarded knowledge that it actually had, and led to the crumbling of one side of this dome, and it led to a huge sinkhole, and to what they call a sacrifice zone of 30 acres. And it took down 100-year-old cypress trees, and even a boat at one point were pulled into this sinkhole and brought up methane infused sludge. He lost his home, not because of big bad government, but because there was no regulation on Texas brine. And this man, this ardent right-winger, became an environmentalist. He said, I don't like the word environmentalist, and I know, you know, it's mainly liberals over there. But he became a member of what's now called the Green Army. It's a small group who are trying to right a great number of wrongs in that state and get their beloved nature back. So that was how Mike got to be an environmentalist, and he's still one. Okay, so what did I learn? Why did they hate the government? In brief, I propose that behind everybody's politics there is a deep story. You take facts out of a deep story, you take moral precepts out of a deep story. It is an imagined situation that is evocative of feeling. And in the right wing deep story, we have ours, but in the right wing deep story, you're standing in line, and ahead of the line at the top of a hill is the American dream. The line hasn't moved in 2 decades, and your feet are tired. You've waited. You don't imagine that you begrudge anybody. You're just waiting in line. And then, in another moment, you see somebody cutting in line. Well, who would that be? It would be blacks and it would be women who, through federally mandated affirmative action, now are given access to jobs that have been formerly reserved to whites and men. Then you see immigrants, undocumented, and refugees, even overpaid public sector workers, and there is the endangered brown pelican, the Louisiana state bird, comes waddling up, and you know, it cuts in line because those liberals put animals ahead of people. And then you see in the right-wing deep story the president waving to the line cutters. Oh, he's their president. He's not our president. We're pushed back, and he's just representing them. So at the end of my book, I go to a rally in New Orleans where Donald Trump was having a primary rally, and excited people, thousands, and you could just feel the fervor. And I thought to myself, watching this, that I've been studying the dry kindling, and that what I saw was the lit match, that he was the deep story candidate. I'm going to put you back in line. I'm not going, this has been, quote, unfair. I will be for you. and make you great again. And they saw nothing from the Democratic Party or any other Republican candidates speaking to them. That's the message of the book. First message is the left is more in an enclave than the right, and the second is that they didn't see, they didn't feel seen, they didn't feel their issues honored in any way, and they put the environment in that category. Let me now kind of turn to the topic here as to how what I've just come back from, what does it tell us about how we can talk across this huge divide? Because there are people on the other side that would like to do that. And here's what I would say could be distilled from my experience. First, we have to get the media out of the way, and we have to get partyism out of the way. And we have to really sit down and get to know people and do it through the auspices of either a grassroots group or church PTA kind of group, and through government, municipal, state, and federal kind of levels. In other words, take a multi-tracked conflict resolution approach. The second thing, and you can do this when you go home, get online and look up the Yale Center for Climate Change Communication. That is the best website on information about how left and right come down on a variety of issues. And here's the thing, and I just discovered this afternoon, so interesting. There's a pessimistic way of reading this state-of-the-art, just came out with a new national survey this year on a range of attitudes toward environmental issues. And you can read it pessimistically or optimistically. And normally when I give talks and when I read things like this, I read it pessimistically. And what does that mean? I compare what liberal Democrats think about the priority that should be given to, say, climate change with conservative Republicans. And the attitudinal gaps are enormous. And you can read this 70-page report, and damn, the Republicans are just, we're so far apart. I'm not advocating you do that. I'm advocating you look at what average voters are saying and what average Democrats believe and average Republicans believe. For example, so you aren't out in left field on green issues. Some 60% of US registered voters in 2018 believe that climate change is caused mostly by human activity. That's a quote. Right, 70%. This is interesting. Then, and the proportion has gone up in the last year by 5%. Most Americans are worried about it and give it priority. But let me give you just some examples of things that we agree on that we don't think we agree on. There is something called the Bridge Alliance, and it's an umbrella group over some 80 different organizations with names like Hi from the Other Side, Living Room Conversations, that we begin a series of conversations, and I think that we will find more agreement than we think, but it has to be done in a special way. And I guess the last point I want to make is that in my 5 years of roaming around, I found one man who seemed extraordinary to me in the degree to which he was skilled at mediation. It's General Russell Honore. He's a 4-star general, retired, and he was the rescuer of the victims of Katrina, 2005. And he's, in his retirement, become an ardent environmentalist, leader of the Green Army. And I watched him make a speech, and it went like this. He was talking to some conservative businessman who believed in freedom, 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 but hated regulation. He began like this. I woke up this morning, I looked out at Lake Charles, I saw a man in a boat. And that man had his line out, but he was about to catch a fish. But that man is not free to lift up an uncontaminated fish. I thought, you genius. We need to do that for patriotism, for the environment. So we need to look to him, I think, for a model for how we can cross this divide. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arlie. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Mark Hertsgaard, veteran journalist, author, and environmental correspondent for The Nation. Mark has written 7 books on a variety of subjects, including the press during the Reagan presidency, the Beatles, and the environment. While interested in many topics, he has focused much of his career on understanding and reporting on climate change and the politics that influence environmental decision-making. One of Mark's books, Hot: Living Through the Next 50 Years on Earth, was a hard-hitting assessment of climate change and our ability to mitigate it and adapt to it. We're thrilled to have him here in conversation with Arlie Hochschild. Hochschild, I've heard it's supposed to be pronounced, sorry. So please welcome Mark Hertsgaard.
I was able to ask Congressman Huffman before we walked in, breaking news now in Washington and across the country. Tomorrow, there will be 300 actions across the country coordinated by young climate activists who will be pressing members of Congress to come out in favor of a Green New Deal that is designed to address the climate crisis by creating a good job for everyone who wants one, and thereby dealing with inequality and economic opportunity at the same time, which of course has been an Achilles heel, frankly, for the environmental argument in this country for a long time. So the Green New Deal, I confess I have a personal interest in this as I think the first writer to talk about a Green New Deal. Unfortunately, it's taken 20 years for it to percolate up. I wrote about this in 1999 in The Nation magazine and in my book Earth Odyssey, and then later in Time magazine, but certainly better late than never. So I was able to ask Congressman Huffman what his position is on this issue and the actions happening tomorrow, including apparently at his office. How many people here have heard about this action that's planned for tomorrow? Quite a few of you. Okay, so he said that he is, and we were speaking on the record, so I can share this with you. He said that he is in favor and has spoken out and publicly for the Green New Deal. And he thinks that's an important way to go. And I asked, did he support the call on the part of the activists who were sitting in at Nancy Pelosi's office and the new progressive star from New York City, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and to have a select committee formed in Congress to push the Green New Deal. He did not support that. And he had his reasons for that. He thought that it was not the way to get things done, that the existing committees would not go along with that, giving up their priority. So I leave that with you as his constituents, what you want to say about that. He will be getting these visits tomorrow, as will Nancy Pelosi and Barbara Lee at their offices. I will note that Nancy Pelosi, when her office was sat in, I guess it's almost a week ago now, welcomed the, as she put it, the energy and the activism of these young people. She urged the Capitol Hill police not to arrest them, and she said that the Democratic Party in the November midterms had run on a platform that calls for a major infrastructure program, including investing over $1 trillion to create many jobs. She did not, however, use the term Green New Deal. And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch in these coming weeks as to whether Green New Deal becomes the de facto climate position of the Democratic Party. That is clearly what the left of the party is pushing, and the activists and writers like myself. One thing that you may want to participate in, December 3rd, this was just announced today by Senator Bernie Sanders' office, he will be having a Facebook Live national town hall meeting to discuss, and Bernie too did not use the term Green New Deal, but that's what he's talking about, solutions to climate change. Bill McKibben will be part of that town hall meeting, Van Jones, and a number of other leaders. So you might, if you're interested in this, you might want to check that out. So that's the news. Now let's have the conversation, and I must say it's a real honor for me to be up here with Arlie, whose work I've read for so many years. And I'm going to ask her questions for about 15 minutes here, and then we will include your conversation, include your questions in the conversation. So Arlie, let's, I read your book when it first came out, and I reread it preparing for tonight. And I want to talk to you about how your book translates into action on climate change, which is really what we're concerned with tonight, and specifically political action. Bill McKibben, who I just mentioned, who was my colleague at The Nation magazine, he said, actually not too far from here, a number of years ago, essentially that our job, and he's speaking there for the movement, our job as activists at this point, precisely because most Americans do agree at this point that climate change is real, serious, needs to be acted on. So our job is not to try to convince the deniers. That 30%, that's not our job. Our job is to recognize that most people are with us and figure out a way to mobilize those people to effective political action. So I guess I want to ask you, are you, in talking about trying to get over the Great Divide, is that really the most effective and wise approach to climate politics at this point, given, as Bill always points out, that we have a very, very short time frame in which to achieve change, as we just saw recently with the IPCC's report, the 1.5 degrees report. We don't have 20 years to change hearts and minds. We've got to move now. We need something like a global Green Deal now. So talk a little bit about Bill's perspective there and what you saw with the sort of the Trump voters, both in Louisiana and extrapolating nationwide.
I agree that we have to be pragmatic and strategic in who we reach out to. But there are a lot of people out there that it would not be wasted breath to talk to. We know that some 6.5 to 8 million people who voted for Barack Obama in 2012 voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Wouldn't you want to have a conversation with them? That would not, I think, be wasted breath. And that's a lot of people. And something like a third of people that voted for Trump, it was a quarter, between a quarter and a third, would have voted for Bernie Sanders if he'd been the Democratic candidate. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you want to have a conversation with them? So what I advocate is reaching out to those groups, and I don't think that we really have done that.
How do you identify those groups, or are they more individuals? How would a Democratic candidate in 2020 target that way?
Well, there's a group called People's Action, you must know, that is going around and trying to find in swing states who that 6.5 to 8 million people are. And so I would ask them what they found, for one thing, and a lot of canvassers out there. And there's a lot of energy trying to situate the American population on this map. And I'm sure somebody out there who has the answer to that question.
And when you look at the midterm results, which are still really coming in, but we have a fairly clear idea, do you see any evidence of some of that, 25% voters, this is roughly 7 million voters, do you see evidence that they are beginning to perhaps sour on the promises that Trump made to them?
I think for a lot of people that voted for him, it was because they didn't see anything else for them. A lot of negative feeling about Hillary. And they didn't feel recognized, they didn't see an agenda. There really needs to be, I believe, a revamping of the Democratic Party platform, and green jobs should be the centerpiece of it. And they didn't see that. And so I think what I'm advocating is not dismissing people for having made a mistaken vote, so to speak. So I wouldn't say that the people I spent a lot of time getting to know would be the first people on my list to speak to. I think we have to be pragmatic, we have to be time sensitive, but that there are a great many of people that could hear this, who already agree, actually. And what my gospel singer friend kind of said about, environmental wackos, that dissipates. If you read this Yale recent report on national opinion, no, people, if you look at the issues, and you don't say, oh, this party was for that party was that. If you had a mediator's skill in passing over that, and just talked about the issues, I think something hugely productive could take place.
So the kind of people that you were speaking to in Louisiana, and I've spent a lot of time as a reporter in Louisiana too, not out in Lake Charles, but I know the people you're talking to. The very first person who ever told me that Barack Obama had not been born in the United States was, in southern Louisiana, actually, an oil worker. Do you think that those people, if they were presented with that kind of a Green New Deal, look, we're going to put you all to work, cleaning up the oil rigs, disassembling them, and making Louisiana a solar state, would that be able to appeal to them? Would that break through what you describe in your book as essentially kind of a tribal identification more, that their cultural identification is more what puts people on the other side of the divide? So A, would they be able to hear that opportunity, and B, do you think they would be open to supporting that, and a candidate calling for that?
I think if it was said in the right way, if we took a leaf from General Russell Honore and said, well, you're for freedom, we're for freedom, we all need, it should be built into a high school curriculum, how to be a good mediator, right? I mean, that's, I think should be a skill as an extension of emotional intelligence, and we all can do it, but some better than others, and so I think they could hear it if you didn't come in saying, look, you people have been stupid, and you don't believe in science, and so on. So,
well, General Honore, you mentioned there as someone, and of course, many people here will remember him after Hurricane Katrina. He was quite the media darling there for a while. He ran for office in Louisiana. What happened to him? He got crushed.
Yes, she did.
It wasn't even close.
No, that's true. That's true.
So that's where I kind of wonder, you know, is that really where we want to put the resources and time and energy? Or, as you know, there's a counter argument within the Democratic Party saying that instead of the Democrats pursuing this strategy, which they've kind of done for 40 years, of chasing this elusive centrist white voter and moving ever to the right, what the Democrats really need to do is expand the electorate by making sure that people who will vote Democratic are allowed to vote and registered to vote.
It's not either or. I think it's not either or, right? And if this is 40% of the American electorate, they can't be ignored. And we have massively lost, really, the political heart of this country. If you look, most of our governors are Republican. If you look at trifectas, you know, where both houses of the state Congress are Republican and the governor too. The Republicans have far more trifectas than we do. So at every level, local, state, and national, and I don't think we can ignore that. We ignore that at our peril. There is when we go into the voting booth, we are voting our region, our education, and our social class. And there is a division on those lines, and I don't think we can ignore it. So I'm all for being pragmatic, but I think we, at the same time, have to do something about this divide. We can't ignore it. It's too big. It's just too big to ignore, I think.
Let me ask you a question about Donald Trump. You wrote most of the book, I believe, before he was actually formally president.
Yeah.
Since he's been president, he has been even more outspoken, more insulting, more volatile, more ginning up his political base, that 40%. He has, in the process, increasingly alienated the rest of the country. I did a piece for The Nation a couple of months ago that pointed out that 49% of the American public wants this man impeached. That that is a historical, unprecedented development, you know. When Nixon was impeached, at the very end, it never got to that high. When Bill Clinton was impeached, it was 29%. So Trump has done everything, and he apparently sees it as his political advantage, to drive people apart. Right. And it looks like a lot of the people who you were talking to down there in Louisiana and elsewhere in the country, most of them have stuck with him as he has gotten increasingly racist and vicious, and even now attacking the military. So some people have said that this is now really a cult, with a cult leader. And it doesn't matter what, as long as the dear leader says it, he can attack the military, they're going to stick with him. He can insult service people, he can make fun of a disabled person, they stick with him. So in a sense it seems that this divide has gotten worse, but it hasn't been the liberals who have pulled away so much as the people on his side who have continued to sort of follow this cult. Can you break into a cult?
Wouldn't it be a great idea to add to the Green New Deal as a centerpiece of the Democratic Party we want to see, being the party of unity, the party of reunification of this divided nation? Why shouldn't that be, why should we be divisive too? Why couldn't we take, the initiative in reintegrating the country? Now, I think, this is weird, but it used to be, we used to have more institutions that combined people of different social classes and regions. We used to have a strong union movement, for example, that put people together. And now we're down to, what, 9% of private sector workers who are unionized. So there isn't that institutional way of doing it. We used to have a compulsory draft where, you know, a PhD person would be bunking with a ditch digger and getting to know the dignity of each other. That isn't with us anymore. So we need actually a new institutional way, and a third platform for the new Democratic Party could be having a kind of a civil service for 1 year where people from different regions came together. Either that's option one. Option two would be in the senior year of every student's a year in high school, they spent 3 weeks as the guest in a family that lived somewhere else. So the North would go south, the South would go north, coast would go inland, inlands would go to the coast, and each student would learn civics, number one, and mediation skills, number two. They would really get they could do interviews with each other and get each other's deep stories and come out with the task. They would be tasked with, well, what are our common grounds? And how is global warming affecting you here as a farmer, or you by the water and the coast? So I think it's we have to hold double goals here. Yes, you know, let's get it done soon, there's no time to lose, but don't conclude that all of these crazy Tea Party Trump people have to be left behind. That would be a mistake, just strategically. I say that not just as a, you know, kill that issue.
So let me be clear here. When you say it would be a mistake to leave them behind, you're not talking only about the 25% of the Trump voters who voted Obama in 2012. You're not talking only about the roughly 7 million Obama voters who, 7 million Obama voters who went for Trump in 2016, and a quarter of them voted for Bernie. You're saying that in addition to those sort of independents, shall we call them, that we should also be talking to the people like, say, my brother-in-law, who thinks, you know, I come from the rural. I grew up on a farm. I know the people that you're talking about. I grew up below the Mason-Dixon line. I'm the only leftist in the family. And so I know these people. And I know what you're saying, too, in the book, that there is a great deal of individual human decency in a lot of them, often coming from their religious faith. But there is also a great deal of prejudice and ignorance, which is not the same thing as stupidity.
Right, yeah.
But there is a certain willful ignorance about, if it's big government, or what I can think of as big government, I'm going to be against it. And so again, I kind of come back to Bill McKibben's question. When we are in, this is an emergency situation, you know, we have got to be moving forward faster than we can even imagine. And we want to be strategic. Do we want to reach out to all of those Trump voters, or really try to target?
I would say target first, but not only. Target, there is, so certainly target first. Well, first, actually in the paperback edition of Strangers, I talk about what I think we ought to do. There's 4 pillars of activism, and they include first sensitizing ourselves to the loss of democracy and the rise of, I think, a totalitarian threat. Second is to revamp the Democratic Party platform, such as this, and get out the vote. And to do 1, 2, and 3, you don't have to talk to anybody you don't agree with. Okay?
Right.
You're fine. But I think think you do, in doing those three, have to also see that somebody should be out there trying to get buy-in, and do that buy-in first by these targeted groups. But not only, you know, there is an organization called the Green Tea Movement. You know, what's that? It's led by a woman who's a Tea Party member, but she's
Very pro-solar.
Yeah, very pro-solar.
And very anti-utility monopoly for blocking the solar.
That's exactly right. And Texas is one of the leading solar states, you know? So things aren't as black and white as they look from within our bubble. And I guess I think strategically for the Democratic Party, it would be very good to claim that we are the unifiers and respectfully lean out to people that don't disagree, while also giving double attention to strategic groups.
And do you see, as just extrapolating from the midterm elections, everyone in the sort of mainstream media is talking about how the big takeaway from this vote is how the Republican Party lost in the suburbs, in particular lost with white suburban women. Is that part of what's happening here? Are those voters, in fact, kind of turning away from Trump because of his divisive rhetoric? And is that an opening for the Democrats?
Yes, I would guess yes. And even the hardcore, though, this guy, Mike Schaff, that I was just describing, after the book came out, I gave him a copy of it and prayed.
And waited. Got in my car.
They all just read their chapter. I don't think they read the appendix with the real facts. But you know, I like my chapter. I took my son, who is a member of the California Energy Commission in charge of renewables, David Hochschild, with me. He'd been on another trip that I'd done. I hold my family into these visits back and forth. And I said, look, Dave, would you come down with me to, let's spend a few days with Mike Schaff on the bayou, and we'll go fishing, and I'm just going to hold the tape recorder. Can you guys come to some agreement on what to do with this getting rid of pollution? And so we did that. And out, it was raining a little, but we were out in the boat, and David asked Mike, does Donald Trump, do you ever have any hesitations about Donald Trump? And you know, it's hardcore, he was just really enthusiastic Tea Party person. His answer was, hesitations, where do I begin? So it depends on the context. He was talking to a young man he knew respected him and liked him, and he was being honest. And you can talk with anybody who will, if you keep at it in the right spirit, where they're sharing their doubts and you're sharing your doubts, and finding some common ground. It's even with that. So I'm not taking back what I'm saying about strategic targeting and the importance of being timely, but I just think that it's a good thing for the country, and it would be a good thing for the Democratic Party to do this reach out also.
Okay. Okay. And there's a few more coming up here. So, Arlie, thinking of the women in the red states, are women in the red states ready to vote for a woman for president?
They all work. Everybody that I came to know and the people they knew are all workers. They don't think twice about it. There's, you know, should I stay home? No. And they have an interest in equal pay for equal work, and many of them are highly religious, and they don't like lechery, and
But if they don't like lechery, why did they vote for someone who literally confessed on tape? I frankly thought, and I have to say I wrote this in The Nation at the time, I was totally wrong. I thought that was the end of Trump's presidential chances, because I thought of my own sisters, both of whom are Tea Party types, and I thought there is no way that they will vote for a guy who brags with that kind of vulgar language. 53% of white women in this country, as I'm sure you know, voted for a self-confessed sexual assaulter.
That's right. But you know what I think this tells us is how desperate they are for someone that recognizes their social class and their region and their sector of society. They didn't see anything else for them, and that's how desperate they are.
Essentially, they voted out of desperation.
I think so. I think so.
What political reforms would you make to help to moderate or calm the political discussion and encourage compromise in this country? Are both parties part of the problem, and what can we do to create greater comity?
Okay, yes, I think both parties are part of the problem. I didn't go into this thinking that, but I came out of it thinking that, I've given a lot of lectures on campuses since the book came out, and when I went to Louisiana State University, I thought, oh, what are they going to think? A lot of critical things in this book, and they loved it. No, you're telling us to get busy, and you're showing us, there's what could happen. We already know it. You're not giving us news, out of sibling that died of cancer or a parent. So, but when I also gave a talk at Pomona College, which is a very elite college, a very liberal coastal college, more negative. Oh, you want us to talk to those racists? Oh, and I scratched my head. I learned something, that the boundaries around the left enclaves are tougher, and there's a kind of I think a lot of good moral energy has sadly gotten turned in on itself into kind of a self-monitoring project, and that's worrisome, and that's worrisome for the entire left liberal spectrum.
What do you mean by a self-monitoring project?
Oh, you used the wrong word.
And I need a safe space in
Yes,
which to
that's right.
speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sort of the political correctness critique.
That's right. I didn't think, I dismissed that before this project, and I came home and talked. There's something to it.
Mm-hmm. Question about climate deniers, and this I'm picking partly because it parallels something I wanted to ask you. We're told that climate deniers will not be convinced by facts. Rather, we must communicate with them through compelling stories. But what do we do with those who are, quote unquote, poorly educated and will not listen to a compelling story? Or, as someone said recently, who's an expert in communication, you cannot reason somebody out of a position, out of an opinion that they didn't reason themselves into. So, and I must say, I get this question a lot from people who, how do I talk to my friends, my family, who are climate deniers? What do you tell them? And I'll confess, I usually say a version of what McKibben says. It's like, at this late hour, don't waste your breath there, frankly. Talk to the people who want to do something and mobilize those people.
Do both. I don't see why we have to. If we're going to win, we have to do both. Yeah. Otherwise, there'll be so much opposition and drag. If I were talking to, if I were talking to an oil worker in Louisiana, that oil worker would have a child in college who was giving them guff, at home, who would have wanted Bernie and probably didn't vote. That is a typical kid in college who is the child of a high-paying oil worker. But the oil worker would love nature, would be a hunter and a fisher, and but nobody would speak respectfully to them to say the following kinds of things. Hey, oil worker, do you know, you're working for Exxon, let's say, that the top executives of Exxon believe that climate change has been, is true, is scientifically true? Did you know that you're looking up to a guy, to the CEO, that CEO believes it, right? So I would say that. And then I would say, I suppose the person was against internationalism. Oh, the Democrats are global, and this is global climate change, too global.
World government and so forth.
World government and so forth. I would say, well, you're part of Ducks International. Mike Schaff thinks Ducks International is a wonderful organization. Well, what is Ducks International? Well, you're trying to shoot ducks in Bayou Corn, and there are fewer of them, and you learn that the ducks do their nesting in Canada, where the overdevelopment has taken away the breeding grounds, and you realize that that's what's reducing the number of ducks. And a guy like Michael Schaffwood, he gives money to this international organization, and he doesn't mind at all the regulations on the number of days of certain kinds of ducks. I couldn't keep it together. The female ducks, the male ducks, and the number of days till Thursday, but then you can, it's very intricate. It's regulation. He didn't mind at all. He understood it. It made sense to him. Well,
here's a question.
I would talk that way to him.
I'm going to throw this one at you, even though it's aimed at me, because I don't know the answer. And I probably should, but it's something I've written about for many years. How do we work against the fake news machine? And this touches on something I wanted to ask you, and you write about this. You mentioned even tonight Rush Limbaugh, the Rush Limbaugh effect, and Fox News. I think, I grew up on a farm, but my dad was a TV newsman, so I've seen that business from the inside for a long time. And TV news tells America what to think. Usually does it implicitly. These days it's a little bit more explicit than it used to be. But when you have 24/7 for 20 years on, you have an outfit that is not a news outfit, it is a propaganda outfit, right? But it is very consistent in putting forward that climate change is a liberal conspiracy, and in putting forward something that you write about a lot in your book, that the sense of aggrievement that the liberals and these educated people on the coasts look down at you. How do people in this room and others who care about making change, especially on climate change, how do we get around that Fox News problem?
Oh.
You see why I gave this one to you, right?
I see why you gave this one to me. Yeah. Some people watch Fox News as if it were a religious service. I came to know one woman who had it, we got into her SUV and she turned the key, Fox News came on. We went to her house, I stayed in her house for 2 days, and she had another TV by her desk and it was on, and then cocktail hour, a larger TV in the living room, again, Fox News. And she talked about it as Fox and friends. Fox is family She actually felt that each of the characters, Hannity was the obnoxious uncle, and you know, who was it? The woman who's now quit was the sassy daughter, and Megan Kelly. So, you know, she familized it. So what do we do? I think we put the environment into the curriculum of third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders, and we institute conversations between children and parents. And the church is divided on the environment. You know, the Southern Baptist Church, which is really a very powerful base for Trump, there's a division on the environment. And in Eastern Kentucky, where I'm now doing field work, there is a movement against mountain removal. And it's different. It's a right-wing environmentalism, and they do it for the unborn child. Okay, there are differences, but there's a crossover there. We should grab that crossover.
What do you think about a proposal that someone made recently, a climate activist, that we have got to begin to have the tough conversations at this point with our family, with our friends, with our coworkers who are not already on board with climate change? And they drew a very explicit analogy with the success of the the gay and the trans movement in this country over the last 20 years, that part of that began with individuals in great numbers coming out to their families, friends, coworkers, etc. Very difficult conversations for many of them to have, and yet the argument was that that was an essential part of changing the zeitgeist in the country to where you could get the kind of legislative shifts that we've seen.
I think that's
Would you see that on climate change?
Yes.
And if so, what would those conversations look like?
Well, I would. Can I go a different place and come back to it? Because an idea just occurred to me. Current fieldwork I'm doing. I met a playwright who lives in Harlan County, Kentucky, and he started a drama company called Higher Ground, and where there's a terrible opiate addiction crisis, really. It's everyone I have interviewed will say, turn the tape recorder off now, and will tell about a member of their family who's succumbed to opiate addiction. Big problem. And what he did was start this company, and he made up a play. He created a play called Needlework, and the actors in the play are former addicts. I thought, wow, what an incredible thing, and they go around. It's a troupe. So maybe we could get something like that going on climate change, where it's some of the drama of dealing with difference of opinion and all that we're talking about now, but you talk about the psychology of trying to reach across divisions. Put it on stage, and that will elicit, in a way indirectly, conversations about, oh, hey, that happened in my family too.
That's interesting. That answers the next question I was going to ask, so I'm going to skip that one, which was, how can I start a conversation with the other side when I can't find a way to talk to them? How do I start the conversation? So that's an interesting way to do that. This is going to have to be the last question, and I think it's a little bit of a devil's advocate question, but in a constructive way. The unspoken desire of the Louisiana people, rather, that you came to know, is to keep this country white and Christian. What are your thoughts about bridging that divide?
Well, it's interesting. You should see my email, because I'm getting emails from both sides, and a lot of the email from the conservative side are by bridgers. And I got an extraordinary and moving letter from an evangelical minister in East Texas who said, "You've written a book about the people I serve, and about me too. And so we really don't agree with each other." You know, I've established that. But he said, "Thank you for writing about them respectfully." And finally, a little good news, because he hated Trump, so he's non-Trump, but very conservative. And he said, "I am a descendant of John J. Calhoun, a big defender of slavery, slave owner." And he said, "I have not come to terms with that fact, nor has the country at large." I thought, well, I was thrilled to get this. At the very end of his letter, he said, "And in this dark time, you know, it's amazing to get some good news from, of all places, Berkeley, California." So I wrote him back, you know, "Thank you very much." You know, and I signed it, "Your friend from Berkeley, California." So you would start with, this can't all be done overnight, but something really can be started immediately, which is a set of getting the bridge builders on their side together with the bridge builders on our side. And I, in fact, tried to do that because I just also gotten an email from two people with People's Action in Brooklyn, New York, and they wanted to go south, and who could I put them in touch with? And I thought, oh, how about this reverend? So I wrote the reverend. "Oh, I know some people that would be interested, you know, coming to visit you. Would that be okay? Your friend from Berkeley, California." So, I don't know, we should try everything. You know, I don't think I have all the answers, but we should all get on our feet, you know, and even, you know, older people who are 60s people, that 60s experience is tremendously valuable now. I feel, you know, energized now as I did then. And so that is my final thought.
Energized and moving. And thank you all very much. I think we're going to hear a couple of last words. Thank you all for being such an attentive audience.
Thank you so much. Thank you again to Congressman Huffman, Arlie Hochschild, and Mark Hertsgaard for an informative and inspiring evening, and to all of you for attending. Thank you.